And then it's always this. Cool. We're live. Woo. Orta, how are you
Cool.
doing? We're live. Woo.
Good, thanks. How's it
Orta,
going?
how are you doing? We're live. Great. Oh no,
Good,
and I
thanks.
just
How's it
realized I have
going?
Twitch open in a tab. Great. Oh no,
Good,
and I
thanks.
just
How's it
realized I have Twitch
going?
overflying, having lifted myself more than absolutely necessary. But cool. All right. Stream elements posted. I'm always pleased when that works out successfully. But cool. Orta,
Nice.
what have you been up to lately?
Uh, I wrote an inordinate amount of TypeScript, although admittedly lately I've been working on web push notifications
Hmm.
for web because now that they've added now that Safari has got the same API as Edge, Chrome, and Firefox, I figured it was worth looking at push notifications for the thing I'm working on, which is very web based. Um,
That's
because
awesome.
now you have a single standard for all websites to send push notifications. It's pretty cool. It's I'm not going to say it's easy to do, but it's could be worthwhile if people think that your app is worth you accepting push notifications for.
If
Uh, that's a bit of a thing, though.
is that this what I'm looking at here, the web push
Yeah,
API?
that's it. Yeah, you basically create a service worker, which is like a per web domain sort of script that lives in the background of your browser, and then that can receive messages, basically echoing a bit here from like your push notification server that you set up as your API.
Mm.
Um, you just have to do a little bit of magic on the front end to say, hey, I would like to be able to receive push notifications, and you've got to do a little bit in creating the service worker system that lives behind the domain, and then you've got the final job of figuring out the push notification sort of server
Cool.
APIs. But once you've got all those ducks lined up, you can feed them, and it works out really neatly.
That's awesome. I also really appreciate the note here that like browsers will explicitly disallow notifications, not trigger a response to a user gesture. Sounds like they really thought this through, actually.
Yeah, I mean, you look on those resources, and they spend a long time saying we do not want this to act like pop-ups and annoying things like in the olden days.
Yeah,
So you have to be very careful with these APIs. So a lot of my framing on in my app is like you really have to go out of your way in the settings to go and find the button to be like, I would like push notifications for this, and you have to click that to then trigger the things. It's pretty
perfect.
interesting stuff. It's a cool tool,
Cool.
cool tool, and now every browser has it. At least every major browser has it.
Yeah, no WebView Android users. Those poor people are gonna miss out. Yeah,
Yeah,
Safari 16 support on Mac 13 and later. What version of Mac am I?
I mean the Mac
13.
one is bleeding edge. It's not even the new. It's the one that they released in the alpha of a few weeks ago.
Wow. Wait, they released an alpha Mac? Oh,
Yeah,
Mac
the
version. There we go.
Mac OS. Yeah, yeah. They always have funky names nowadays. So not quite the cats that I was used to. Paloma, Sonoma, maybe. I'm not sure of my San Francisco geography.
Sonoma. That's my instinct. Good for them. Good for them. Branching out. Oh wow, 64-bit Intel and ARM. That's us. Anyway, cool. Um, I forget. So we were going to talk about pull requests, but we should introduce ourselves first. Orta, you wanna give the spiel who you are, what you've done?
Sure. I'm for the majority an open source programmer. I've briefly gone dark for a year or two at the moment to work on my own thing. I used to work on the TypeScript team, so a lot of people may have seen my work in the playground, the revised documentation, the revised branding. Um, I basically was involved in sort of a lot of the community work on trying to help TypeScript as a project scale to the amount of people that were coming in and being very interested in learning TypeScript for the first time. It was sort of the point at which a lot of people were now in teams that were already using TypeScript, and so they had to learn TypeScript in a different way than somebody who has to learn TypeScript in order to set up all of the tooling and infrastructure. So a lot of my work was sort of doing all this invisible work that allows all the documentation to be very easy to understand.
For sure. Cool. Yeah, that's That was really really helpful stuff. Thank you for doing that. And then you also did CocoaPods, the website, the manager.
A bit of all of it. CocoaPods is a NPM, but for iOS apps. So back in the day, we I used to be an iOS native developer. My sort of path to JavaScript came from realizing that React Native was kind of a faster way to be able to work on native projects because you can press save and automatically see the changes. There's lots of good JavaScript tools for building API-driven apps, and so I really did learn that basically React Native was, for most cases, a better way to be building these types of applications. Um, and so from that, I sort of learned a little bit of JavaScript, of TypeScript, of a thing called Relay, and but a lot of that came from me wanting to understand my tools and dependencies. And so CocoaPods was just one of the things that we needed to build. There was no package manager for iOS and native projects. And so one of my friends started building it, and I started contributing, and it's been 10 years since. Woo.
It's wild.
But it's just it's a tentpole project for that ecosystem. Like Apple have now got their own equivalent, and I would love to say that more and more people are moving to to from CocoaPods to Swift Package Manager, but like CocoaPods' traffic is continuing to grow, which is very strange. I believe it's mainly due to the growth of React Native, Unity, and Flutter, and those are all people using CocoaPods still under the hoods, whereas all of the native engineers are sort of slowly migrating their way to Swift Package Manager, which is sort of built into all their tooling.
That's really interesting. I can see why the two have converged or had diverged, why they both exist. But do you see a world, a future in which there's just one package manager for native iOS folks?
Yeah, I'd love that. Like, at this point, we're managing a project, and all of the people that like I don't know if this is something you've felt actually. Like you become really good as a product developer, and then you start finding ways to improve your product development like flow, and eventually you get to a point where you only start working on tools. And then you're only working on tools, and people are like, "Oh wow, we'll pay you to work on bigger and more complicated tools," and then you only do that for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And that happened with everybody that worked on CocoaPods, except the tooling wasn't the same sort of tool chain. So you imagine if all of our JavaScript tools were built purely in Rust, and suddenly you find yourself not wanting to work in JavaScript anymore because you've spent all this time in Rust, and you actually appreciate the Rust ecosystem now more than you appreciate the JavaScript ecosystem.
Yeah.
And so you slowly migrate yourself out of the main ecosystem you're really trying to contribute to. This
Yeah.
happened tons on CocoaPods.
That's wild. But that's a big part of why TypeScript actually had such a good time at the beginning. No, that it's integrated into the ecosystem that it's playing in. That it's not written in some random other language.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
I
fun.
mean, I originally migrated our entire app was in Flow, because I looked at Flow and said, "Hey, it looks like a smaller differential from JavaScript to Flow than the difference between JavaScript to TypeScript." This is maybe about 8 years ago when we were sort of making all these decisions, um, and I think their pitch generally was and is a bit better in being JavaScript with types.
Mm-hmm.
A bit better in that TypeScript enhances a few other things, but every day is trying to implement JS doc comments, going from like the parsing of the document, going all the way through to your editor. So when it does it now, but I couldn't do it myself because that's all OCaml, and that language is very far from JavaScript in my opinion.
Yeah. I'm actually curious now. If we go to the Flow website and just look at any arbitrary, well, I am not a OCaml person.
Not even sure where to find an interesting one, right?
Yeah. Here we
Yeah,
go.
that's what that sort of thing sort of looks like. This compiles into a JavaScript module.
That's cool. Yeah.
It's cool.
I learned in one programming language as class in college Haskell, Prolog, and Salsa, which is a set of extensions on Java for concurrency. And one of the things there that I came to appreciate first was the beauty of programming languages. That this looks beautiful to me. It's wonderful and functional. And the second
Yeah.
thing I came to appreciate was just how obnoxiously difficult it is to pick up on a new paradigm, especially if you're not intrinsically motivated to do so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember we did Prolog, and like once like I mean it must have been this must be what it feels like to learn an imperative language for the first time, where you're just trying to make the characters line up in the right way so that eventually the compiler says it's fine. I felt like Prolog was quite the same, where you really have to line up the constraints. It's a constraint driven language where you sort of ahead of time define the set of constraints, then it finds the answer within the set of constraints for you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which makes it an interesting programming language, but also like it's not you start at the top and you work your way down. It's you set these rules and then you set it going and see if it turns out the way that you're hoping it does.
Yeah.
It makes it a different type of programming.
Yeah. And it's I think super useful for people to learn this stuff just as an intellectual exercise, even if they never end up using it. Like that idea of constraints based programming was for me actually really helpful in trying to understand the TypeScript type checker, or rather the
Yeah,
type system and understanding how to do fun logic in there.
yeah, I
Logical
agree.
programming languages. But cool.
I mean,
We
especially
originally
when you're doing
oh
that faffing with like conditional types and stuff like that, you really are starting to get into strange constraints
yeah
systems.
yeah funny. I realized I always try to clear the playground when I'm not using it just to
Yeah.
get a clean slate. Anyway, we had originally started talking about pull request reviews because you and I came in, I think, with slightly different starting places for how we set up PR automations. For me, the repos that I've been on have, on average, been kind of spammy, but with high positive intent. Like I work on a lot of static analysis stuff, so we don't get a lot of beginner people. So for me,
Yeah.
having very discrete fleshed out issue forms with multiple required fields like expected versus actual, and then a whole bunch of automation like when someone sends a pull request. I oh nice, Ron sent a new one. I make sure that like it where's the compliance spot? We have a compliance action in here that I've been using that sets up to make sure it's got a semantic title that the person then has to fill out. Can you type in chat, Freedom DAO? Oh boy, yes you can.
Chat, I type a chat.
Yes. So like we make sure that it addresses a linked issue and has all sorts of stuff set up on it. But you might have a slightly different context. What is your preference around PRs, Orta?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty minimal on mine. I usually wait until I find a problem from me being annoyed about something. I okay, so maybe here's where I start. I have deal with I always try and have a defensive opinion about my open source because every time I'm doing open source, that usually means somebody wants some of my time for something. Right? That something could be reviewing, that something could be answering issues, it could be all sorts of things. Um, and so one of the things that I cared about most was trying to make sure that the things that were culturally unique to that repo, there was a way to sort of automate the process of letting people know how they've done something wrong. So that's exactly what you have when you talk about your compliance one. And my equivalent to that is danger, which is like a pull request runtime whose entire goals are to give you a sort of uh, errors, warnings, and notes in the pull request itself. It's a cool little idea. I made it for CocoaPods originally because we would get so many people contributing to the code base that didn't know Ruby, and so we had to sort of introduce them to like Ruby concepts in a way that didn't require me to constantly go back and forth and tell them these things again and again and again. Um, and effectively, it gives you this environment where you have access to the pull request, you have access to the diff, and you can just evaluate some very like reasonable logic code that says, hey, if the PR is over 50 lines of code long, then you have to say add a changelog entry. And like it'd be very hard to sort of declaratively describe a system like that. And as well, I also wanted to do this defensively, so I only gave a runtime and described how to make plugins, so that if anybody wanted to be able to share their code, then they'd be able to share them via npm modules, for example. Um, and so every code base that uses this, like the React team use this Danger, for example, for printing out all the different bundle size differences between every pull request that happens. And like, it's not strictly about their it's not strictly about their pull request flow. In that case, it's also the same in definitely typed. It's also about trying to provide additional runtime based information. But hopefully it won't show it unless it has something to say. So you may not see it because in those pull requests, because it will only comment if it needs to comment. So I don't know whether you'll. Oh, there's one. Look there, you see, by Danger.js.
Cool.
Tells you the differences between your different things.
That's awesome.
So it's a nice tool for all that sort of runtime communication between your CI and your pull request.
It's really interesting. I'm gonna just take a quick peek at the React Danger file then. So this is in fact written in JavaScript. This is not a DSL, domain specific language. So yeah, this is all looking very reasonable. So they get builds from Vercel. They create rows and a table. So they're making a table with the header.
Markdown table, basically. Yeah.
Cool. And look at this Markdown. Boop. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's the one. It just prints Markdown, but only if they've chosen to do the Markdown. And if this build, for example, if this build they fix whatever is adding to the bundle size, then Danger will go and delete that old message, because the next Danger run it won't send that Markdown warning. And so it will know, looking at the diff of the old messages and the new ones, what messages are there and not there, and it will delete itself, basically. Cool. So it's like up to date and in your environment.
Could you modify labels that are on the PR? Like I'm just now mentally connecting. I've got this issue in my template TypeScript node package, which is this starter set that I've got to be eventually using for all my repos. And I want to be able to remove a label when someone re-requests review, because I always put status waiting for author when I request a review, and it's annoying how people will request review and then 12 hours later I will see it. So is this something that Danger could do?
I wouldn't use Danger for this bit. Oh. So if you have to sort of think in GitHub abstract concepts. GitHub will give you a webhook that can trigger a GitHub workflow for anything, and that would include your ability a webhook specifically for review requested. And so what I would do is have a review requested workflow that would then evaluate some JavaScript. Danger does get supported on that. Like, there is a way to run Danger on those evaluated ones, and it'll just run a Danger file, which is only the DSL setup for you. And then that would easily be able to have the access rights to be able to do that. Because a lot of the problems with this is about, like, at what level of the GitHub sort of GitHub Actions processes do you have a token that has the right to be able to add and remove labels, right?
Yeah.
You need something that can mutate the pull request. And so if you do it on an action that is considered safe, because no one can send a pull request to edit that thing to then trigger the review comment, then you could do it from there, for example.
Got it. Interesting. I know I've had issues with token permissions on public open source before, where forks, or rather PRs sent from forks, don't have as many things they're able to do, which is perpetually an irritant to me. So I will.
Yeah, it was a lot of problems on the TypeScript website, for example. I found there is a workaround, and it's generally a bit of work. There's a thing called, right? This is like really in the weeds about GitHub Actions, but GitHub Actions normally you say, hey, I want this workflow to run on a pull request,
Mm-hmm.
which is very reasonable. But what you can do is you can say pull request target, which means it will only run on the base of the branch. So it'll only run on the safe version that you have on your code base. There it is, right at the bottom of your scroll list.
Awesome.
And pull request target allows you to have a different set of security. It basically gives you write access because it's running your versions of it, never the code that's from them. And so that would need to be you don't want to be sort of evaluating or running other people's the code that might have changed in that environment. But for example, what I did for TypeScript was originally I would build their project on pull request and then send an artifact to pull request target. And pull request target would then load that. And then that would then be the work in progress build that other people could look at.
Got it. Okay. This event allows your workflow to do things like label and comment on PRs from forks. Wow. That's so interesting. So you were, I mean, that makes sense though, because there's an unsafe execution environment, the head,
Yep.
and the fork, and then the safe one, the base, the upstream.
Exactly. That's exactly what this is built to address. They only added it a year or two ago. I thought it was a very clever abstraction.
Oh yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. One of my issues with GitHub Actions has always been that it feels very new, and like in theory it could do all the stuff we want, but sometimes it can be a pain knowing when they add things or when stuff is now supported. Like I've talked to a lot of people, including folks who work at GitHub, who did not have an answer like you just did for how to do the thing I'm trying to do. So this is great.
You're welcome. Yeah, no, and it's because it solved a bunch of my problems too.
Great.
Uh,
I got an interesting question in the chat from a repeat member. Hi, Chrissy. CBID2. How can someone with limited coding knowledge make a GitHub action? I have thoughts, but Orta, do you want to go first?
I thought they had a builder somewhere, more complicated, until eventually you were saying, "Hey, well, when a review has been requested, then the webhook from that is going to trigger so and so and so." You end up with like a really complicated set of clever heuristics. Um, at least that's my opinion. You start off nice and small, copying, and then you slowly build up until you have
Yeah.
an ecosystem of workflows.
Yeah. This is a very if you give a mouse a cookie type of thought, which for those who haven't seen it is this adorable book that starts with giving a mouse a cookie and ends with like I don't know the destruction of Western civilization or something. Yeah, great stuff. But yeah, I agree. I think building yourself up, starting small is always good. I would also say, if you got limited coding knowledge, that's gonna hamper you in virtually every coding area thing you do. Some more than others. Like if you're working on documentation, you might have an easier time than if you're working on GitHub Actions. So practicing that coding knowledge is always useful if you're trying to do coding area stuff. Free Code Camp, Codecademy, whatever projects you have on your own, anything to practice coding is good.
But it's worth noting that this is a bit orthogonal, right? Like understanding how to run a build, which is effectively what you have to do, is quite different from writing JavaScript. Like knowing what happens when you do npm run tsc or when you git clone, like having a rough idea of what those sort of steps are and what the processes are to actually clone and build your app. Those are like things that you don't have to have programming experience for. You kind of have like IT skills to pull those off. And so it is actually scratching a different itch, in my opinion.
Cool. Yeah, that's true. That is true. Um, I would. One of the. Oh, Chrissy's asking if we can repeat the advice again. Glitches keep happening. That's unfortunate that the glitches are happening. They seem to be on the Twitch end because Stream Elements is posting. I don't know what's going on there. But yeah, you'll be able to watch the recording later. Also, just in TLDR, yes, start small, work your way up. Helps to learn the code, like to keep practicing code more than the basics. But yes, it is interesting. I do find them to be orthogonal. But at the end of the day, there's the core knowledge, and then there's the stuff that builds on the core knowledge, and these have
Yeah,
overlapping
don't
cores.
disagree.
Yeah, cool. So, what do you want to do next, Order? What's on your mind?
Um, so I think I'd show you something nice, right? Like, it, here's a strange problem that has only happened to me on CocoaPods, but hasn't happened to me on any other repo, and that is quite often people post issues that are only the title. The code of the issue is the body of the issue is the exact template, and this happened to me over the course of like 2 or 3 years. It went from like being an occasional thing to being the majority of issues that happen on this repo, um, which is absolutely bonkers to me. Because you know, every time somebody writes an issue, that requires a human being on the other side to go and look at this issue, try and decide whether that issue is worth the time. And when we get things like my error and the template, we got enough of those that over the course of multiple years, I decided it was finally time to automate. And so what I ended up doing was creating. It's ironic, right? We have danger file. Look, you see that? It's a capital D danger file. This is Ruby code. This is the Ruby version of the one that we looked at. So danger is a set of principles, not necessarily a single instance of it. So there is danger in Ruby, there's danger in JavaScript, there's danger in Rust, there's danger in Python, and there's danger in Swift. And they all have different sort of sets of principles, but the goal is to feel native to the environment in which you're working. And danger here doesn't actually do any of that work. This one here is about trying to enforce, making sure that we don't accidentally have bad tests and making sure that we include changelog entries and things like that. This all lives in GitHub workflows. So we have, it's talking a bit earlier to the idea of like, if you don't just think of GitHub Actions as being a system that responds to pull requests, you can start thinking of GitHub Actions as a generalized webhook system. And so in this case, you can see here on the top 3 lines, we've got on issues when they're opened. So there is many different types of webhooks that you can receive about issues when they're closed, when they've been edited, when they've been labeled, things like that. This is set to only that one filtered down list of things that issues do. And then you'll note that permissions issues right also it allows me to explicitly state this will mutate the issues. And so I use this one that GitHub have called GitHub Script, which is like their version of a light version of Danger. It basically runs your code with a bunch of GitHub elements put into your runtime ahead of time. So you see here, I pull out the issue on line 17, and that's it. Right? I didn't have to make an asynchronous call to go get the issue data or like figure out what the issue number was or anything like that. You're just given all of the like useful bits of information straight away, and this is cool. This is like a light version of Danger. And that was why I ended up using it. And so all it does is some reasonably smart white space reduction, because it turns out the text that comes in does not need to match the text that comes out, and it checks to see if it's the template, and if it is, then it just sends a GitHub message automatically closing it, being very polite, because there was a point at which I was starting to not be polite about these, because you're wasting my time every time I have to go read it and then close it. And instead it automatically closes it and does the work. And like all those console logs, whatever. Just like that was just to figure out all this white space issues. And so it's cool. And this is like 4 or 5 lines of JavaScript. If you remove all the logs.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. I would love to have like a generalized version of this. Something that kind of reads the templates from your repository and figures out whether that, they are just going off of that.
Yep, exactly. That would be trivial to either build from this JavaScripty thing or to just make as your own GitHub action.
Word. I
Yeah.
also see. Actually, I'm curious. CocoaPods is written in
Ruby.
Ruby. Is there a GitHub scripts that can do Ruby, or must they must they be
You would need
JavaScript?
to run it and eval it yourself natively. Like GitHub definitely prioritize JavaScript and shell. They're the two
Mhm.
things that you can really get. Oh, is it official though?
It is not official. It is some
Yeah,
rando, as much of our open source life.
but they've taken the idea of it, so that's pretty solid.
Nice. Yeah. It's got 23 stars, 90% coverage. It feels like a fleshed out project. Cool.
Yeah, I agree.
Awesome. One thing that we were talking about a bit before we dive too much into this is where that balance is. For example, there are. I think we first started talking in Discord about PR titles,
Yeah,
whether it's up to the
PR
maintainer.
title failed my build.
Yeah, did you send a PR to one of my things? How did we start talking about this?
Yeah, I think I did. It might have been like either making it so that you submitted publishable builds that
Yeah,
were provenance. Yeah.
that's what it was.
But that one might have automatically got it because it took the name. Oh no, I must have done that. Look at me trying
Yeah,
to make it fit the
I
syntax.
hate how GitHub is so verbose about this one random thing that everyone does. I hate it. I've had PRs where I just keep getting it wrong. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Um,
it's silly, but it brings up an interesting topic. I think. What so given the set of tasks that one could do for a PR, ideally we'd automate as much as possible, right? Like I would love to automate the process of fixing up the PR title, which is actually a shit. I keep forgetting to file that issue. That's an issue that I'm gonna file on this repo. Ooh, that's not what I want open. Here we go. Um, but there are always going to be tasks that you really can't automate, like let's say PR titles until someone writes an action that does it for us. So when is it the maintainer's responsibility to set up little things like that versus the contributors?
we don't have a system for this at heart, right? Like what we're really talking about here is a multi-level acceptance criteria, which is there are things that are if you'll allow me to briefly swear on your thing, there is the bullshit work that I, as the person sending you the PR, need to do, and there's the bullshit work that you doing it on the other side reviewing have to do. And like half of the work there is trying to decide who has to do which bit of it, right? So you know, does first of all, you forced me to already make my commits support this syntax, which is definitely not how I would write a commit, which is fine because I was being told it on the way in. But like, and that was prohibiting me making a commit, which is cheap and trivial for me to do that. Because I'm already there in my terminal. I'm just rewriting it anyway. A pull request check requires like I've done everything. I would never expect to have to set a style of thing like that. And then the third is like trying to understand where the value is in doing it, right? So like to me as a contributor, there's very little like the title is meant to communicate to you the thing I did, and usually that's going to be more than one commit. And
Mm-hmm.
so like where does the value in I don't feel like I would be doing that sort of work. That feels to me like I would like a green build that does not tell me this is done, but I would like for you to have a you can't merge this yet separate of that because
Yeah,
there's a sort of set of workflow things that needs to happen afterwards. If that makes sense.
that does. Yeah, I think the way I'm contextualizing it in my head is putting tasks or aligning tasks to what the actual benefit is, or what you were speaking to in the early um, minute. Like just what are you actually benefiting from? Like the benefit of having, let's say, a semantic PR title is what twofold for the tooling to make automatic change logs and releases, and then for searchability later on. Uh, that that is something that is useful, but doesn't need to block, say, reviewing the PR. Like that, you shouldn't block review like actually make getting work done on these trivialities. Yeah.
Yeah,
Also,
and that's the tricky thing. We only have red and green, right? There is you can make yellow systems, but that is invisible. It was like a problem we had with Danger. That's why Danger posts a comment and
mhm,
eventually deletes it itself when because like the idea is that there are warnings. There are things that you should know about the thing you've done that might not necessarily block the build.
yeah.
Um, and and those warnings are really good at being things that the reviewers have to do before it's done. An example that we had at Artsy was um, we were a small team and we wanted to make sure that the analytics team had a Google spreadsheet of every single analytics event in our entire app. And so if you ever edited a file that included analytics references, then there'd be a warning that says, hey, you might need to go update the Google Calendar thing or Google spreadsheet here. So click on it. Um,
Hmm.
and that is like a nice halfway point of like something that you probably might have to do, might not have to, but you can't. I couldn't block the build on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, a bunch of all the strange stuff.
That's really interesting. And I do agree. I wish we had more granularity in PR statuses. Right now, yellow is pending. That's semantically what that implies and what that conveys, um, which is silly. I will.
It's pending being accepted.
Yeah, we need yellow. We need blue. We need. This reminds me of the difference between a lint error and a lint warning, or even info, because a lot of the times in PR cultures that allow it, which is most, if you have warnings, they float away. But that's in part because warnings aren't in your face. Like most projects don't cause lint warnings to put little banners or little comments on PRs
Yeah.
the way you're describing. Yeah, or at least they don't. They also don't require you to explicitly check off like, yes, I know this is happening, which I would love for a GitHub environment.
Yeah, there is some clever systems that are built into how GitHub Uh, a GitHub action can add CLI level regexes for things that needs to be yeah I don't know what the term is. If you go to the GitHub action for setup node, I could probably take you to them. That because TypeScript's included in there. So let's just take a look at its root action.json, I think is it? Action.yaml. Do they include any runif?
Are you talking about
No, they might.
annotation detection?
Yeah, it could be annotation detections. The thing that basically, if it sees a TypeScript error message in the build logs at all, it will actually inline add them to your logs in a way that's very easy and accessible from the front end. Yeah, yeah, that's the one.
Cool. Yeah, this isn't I think quite what you're talking about, but it's the start of it.
Yeah,
Where is
you
it?
can declare in your action. So when Node sets up Node for your CI, it also adds some TypeScript ones to automatically do it. Yeah, it's not those
Not
specifically.
those.
These are like the Danger API basically inside your GitHub Actions.
Cool. One note on
Yeah,
actions. A lot of them are built in a way where, well, basically the setup is that you have a release on a branch on a commit that GitHub uses to publish. So a lot of us just check in the dist, which I always found annoying. That's how my GitHub actions are set up in repos.
yeah. You don't want to build step in the GitHub Action to run the GitHub Action.
Yeah.
I think honestly over time,
Matcher.
I reckon GitHub will start moving to Deno for this sort of stuff. Yeah, matches. There it is. Add matches.
Oh, Deno would be nice.
Yeah, because when I was looking at changing the syntax of TypeScript CLI output, I had to make sure that all this stuff was set up in ahead of time to get everyone going up.
Man, this -1 on GitHub Actions documentation here. Really, huh? Really finding it difficult to find docs on this thing that you and I both can confirm exists. This is very whatever. Anyway, I want to surface some messages into the chat because it's been a little while. 5G technician, thank you for chatting. What's up, Java freaks? I might be a freak, but I'm not a Java freak. Orta, have you written Java in the last few years?
No, only briefly for a bit of sort of an Android equivalent of a game that I was writing at one point.
Cool. Yeah, no, I haven't written Java in quite some time. It was my first language I learned in high school, and then also I did TEALS, the like West Coast teaching schools thing. Uh,
Yeah, my university was a C# university,
ooh,
so we didn't learn
nice.
Java. Not there.
Remember getting mad at other programming languages whenever when we did that? Yeah. From Swansor, Nico. I learned I lean to all the work to be done by the maintainer, keep things quick and easy for newcomers. I usually write a semantic commit message myself using a squash commit. Yeah, especially for
Very
first time
useful.
contributors, it's definitely good to take work off their plate.
Yeah, it's also nice to know that you're doing a thing that everyone does. Like semantic commits, very reasonable option. It's like semantic versioning, right? You have to choose something, and
Mhm.
it's not perfect, but it's good enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Comment from Chrissy, maintainer tip. When you have more than one person who wants to be assigned to the same issue, give it to the one who asked first and then encourage the other person or people to add their suggestions to said PR. I agree. I personally don't really like having assignments. In I believe the TypeScript repo refers to this as the licked cookie problem, where as soon as someone licks a cookie, no one else is going to want
No one
that
else
same
wants to touch
cookie.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see why if it can make someone feel more comfortable working on an issue if they know no one else is working on it. But I've also seen a lot of times where the cookie is licked and then for months later no one else is willing to take a bite. So your mileage may vary.
Yeah, I think a lot of that depends on like the amount of time commitment necessary to fully understand and commit to even just the reviewing of these sort of things. Like a TypeScript pull request, it takes understanding the ramifications of everything takes forever. Like,
Yep.
and then
I
making sure that
typically
everyone's
have
fine.
open for months my PRs, and that's not anyone's fault. It's just these things are complex and difficult to review.
Yeah, yeah. And to persuade some of these people to give you their time instead of doing something that may well be better for the project is also tricky.
Yeah. My favorite one. I wonder if I just look up TypeScript cake PR if that'll.
Yeah, I was working that.
Yeah, I remember. Oh, one of my favorite memories of you is we did a meetup in the New York City Code Academy office. Well, the only Code Academy office. And I wanted to try to get the PR reviewed, so I showed you and you said, "Oh, I'll take a look." And then you looked at the history, and I saw your eyes go, "Oh no!" Like just
No,
no, shut it down. Yeah.
hey, I'm just honest nowadays about that sort of stuff. Uh, your welcomes ones are. I honestly, I had to learn all the compiler API myself pretty around probably around the same kinds of time frames you did, because there's something interesting that like they use the compiler API internally, and but it's a little bit different from the compiler API that's available externally because you can actually do types of type checking stuff that's just not publicly available. Um, and so you end up with like a really sort of you don't know what's public and what's not public when you're trying to deal with the compiler API for the TypeScript. Yeah, the wiki is really good. The wiki is reasonable. The problem with trying to document something like that is that it's just like a lot of internals that people slowly learn and make their own equivalent. Like, I like this idea that like people created the TypeScript handbook, right? The TypeScript compiler handbook, um, as a way that felt a lot like when I joined TypeScript and there was like people making fake versions of the TypeScript like learning handbook, and I really needed to sort of like jam all that stuff into one single official canonical source. So I did a bit of work in here. Every time I had to write a script or something that used the TypeScript API, I came in and documented it and put it in there to try and figure out make the next step easier. But really,
Was
it's just
there?
helping people with muffs.
Yeah. Is there another place you would go outside of the official docs to understand the compiler API? I'm just curious.
The Discord,
Oh,
like
the
the
Discord.
channel. Yeah, that compiler API channel was one of the first channels I made when I made it official, and it's like one of the best like canonical sources because nowadays you have access to Jake Bailey and Wes Wiggum in there, and that's enough to say the least. Um, they both. I mean, Jake's reasonably new. He just joined as I was leaving, so he must be there about 2 years now. But he is extreme. Look, there he is, Jake Bailey already. He's
This smiley
extremely
face.
smart and very very quick at like mastering this. He was like tech lead of the Python version of TypeScript, like their maybe Pylint, I think Pylint VS Code. And then he came over to TypeScript to try something new but in the same space. And he's just excellent.
I'm now
Really, really.
stalking Jake.
Yeah.
Ha! 2020 pilots. Yeah. Also, shout out
Yeah.
to Andres Mateos, TypeScript's community superhero. So I have the occasional pull request to TypeScript. Like I have like a few open now from like a few weeks separate. If you look at
Yeah.
Andres,
70-ish. Yeah.
what the shit?
Woo!
Pardon my French. My God. And this
Yeah.
person, Mateus, has a full-time job working at, if I remember right, Replay.
Replay. Yeah. They have come out of nowhere and really like they used to be very much a compiler API user and then at some point flipped the switch and started really doing it. If you want some of the people like
Stately.
Tarasic, I'm not quite sure how to do that. They must have contributed like I would be like 500 or 600. I something like that line.
Ridiculous.
Look at that, 609 closed.
Also, I got it wrong. It was, Andorus works at Stately, not Replay. Replay is Mark Erickson, mixing my TypeScript community members. Yeah, I mean, this is just absurd. Like there's no reasonable way for me to explain how these people are able to be so productive in the TypeScript.
Yeah,
it's truly impressive.
I found myself getting to a point where when I would get bugs assigned to me for TypeScript, I would just really like I'd write them up in a way that made it very explicit what I would like, and I just expected him to pop by and just do it for me.
Yeah.
And then I'd get back to working on the website. And it was very useful for both of us.
It's a great delineation of concerns. I got a question from the chat for you. Does CocoaPods have a writing style guide for maintaining the docs? If so, how has it improved the project and what challenges have you faced in implementing it?
I'd say no, it doesn't have a style guide. Neither does the TypeScript handbook. In many ways, the style guide for both of them is what I feel and how I write, having wrote the documentation for both sides. Realistically, one of the things for CocoaPods, what we really wanted was a particular voice that was sort of as though you were pair programming with somebody. So it wasn't like the language style wasn't built to be deeply formal and very strict about how it described things, but aimed to be quite like informal. And we use British English everywhere, and tried to give it at least a bit of a character. Whereas the TypeScript handbook had to be very definitive, had to be terse quite often in veins in which like CocoaPods we would not have been terse, in part because TypeScript documentation there's so much of it necessary, and so you need to, and it has to last like this version of the handbook has got to last at least 5 years for it to be worth all the redo, and so it's my job was to give it a consistent voice across every single different page and to try and keep that voice as people made PRs to it. And that's often the hardest part, because if like there's maybe 5 or 10 jokes in a 45-minute read, and people will constantly send PRs trying to get rid of them. Be like, how dare you make a Doctor Who joke in here, or bees actually have 8 legs, not 6, or something like that. I can't remember what that one was. Whereas at CocoaPods, we don't necessarily have most of those problems. Like people don't send us documentation updates to CocoaPods. Basically, I wrote them back in 2015, and they've basically been consistent ever since. Um, so a lot of it depends on what type of documentation you're building. If it's a tutorial, it could be written very like light and airy. If it's reference, then it probably needs to be quite like short and explicit. But it's funny because like we have this code style on the CocoaPods one, but like that's not even something you should think about nowadays because there's auto code formatters. Like, um, and so that's not a thing. But yeah, maintenance is a big thing, right? Like TypeScript's a good example. Actually, both of them are great examples. CocoaPods has an update once a year, and it never breaks backwards compatibility.
Right.
TypeScript doesn't really break backwards compatibility, but it releases every quarter, and usually with features that need edits to other parts of the documentation. So the maintenance of documentation to ensure that like it is still up to date and that it still like describes the thing that it's trying to describe means like you either have to have a very like a concerted effort on every release to go and update documentation, which is what I was doing while I was at TypeScript and tried to do for a few like releases after. Um, or you just kind of have to accept pull requests from the internet that will constantly try and like update the little bits over time to try and get them all in line. Um, and that's just a problem, right? Like it's just a thing you have to do, and somebody has to do it. You can't auto generate documentation. You can't rely on Copilot for your documentation on the language stuff that has just been released because
Yeah.
it doesn't know it exists, for example, and it has to be accurate. So it's only good at guiding you in terms of Copilot.
One of the things
So
I've always found horrifying about documentation is that if you have a mistake, it's exceptionally difficult to know where that it exists, or that even once you know it exists, who it's impacted. Like what community issues have arisen because of a misunderstanding perpetuated by an honest mistake.
yeah, like a good example is the TypeScript tsconfig reference. Before I worked on TypeScript, there was no reference. There was just like a list of compiler flags you can send to TypeScript, and those compiler flags would give you a hint about what each one did. And so this page here that you've got on the side is sort of the answer to that problem of a lot of people did not understand what a million flags in the tsconfig do. And so this, I forced myself, like the website will not build if there is not a single markdown for every single tsconfig flag. So if a new one is added, the website will refuse to build and will refuse to update a new version until you go and manually add this sort of information. Like,
That's awesome.
when was it released? What is it related to? What's its default values? Is it a recommended flag? Those sort of things are like, those are great, except if you don't have someone that cares about dealing with it every quarter, then 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 everybody just says, well, the website won't build at all anymore.
Yeah.
Not that I haven't added the new Markdown document.
Oh well.
It's a trade-off, right? Like these documentations have to be maintained, but at what level do you want to force people to do the work or not? And I think the TypeScript team is still trying to find that now that I'm not in the team and there isn't really someone that cares about the documentation in the way that I truly cared about documentation. It's just people that write docs.
That's difficult.
Yeah, which is it is what it is. The TypeScript team hire compiler engineers. That's what they're good at, and that's what makes the entire thing run.
Do you have, by the way, an example of a good PR reference for a documentation review? I'm just curious if we can look at one. You okay?
No, all my good ones are gonna be like on the when I had full time on TypeScript. No one sends us documentation PRs. Plus, they all won't live in there. There's like a separate repo for documentation.
Got it.
Because like, well, CocoaPods is quite clever in its documentation in that it's sort of half JS doc and then half annotated markdown documents that sort of reach into each other. So that like that stuff there will be reached out and placed on the website um, as a sort of extract the JS doc from these files and then put that in for the reference materials.
I like that.
Um,
Yeah, I
so
remember
it's
I once looked at I used to do C++ dev, and the first project I'd ever seen that did that extensively was then it was like the Qt project, like a general cross-plat framework for C++, and their documentation was incredible, and I was so impressed by it. And then I would
paid
try to
for
go
it.
to the doc source. It's the source code.
Yeah, it's
They
the source
actually did
code.
a really good job of that.
Yeah, I think it's mixed. There's a really here's a really good example from this. If you go to the CocoaPods, let's go to the CocoaPods website. So cocoapods.org. Do a search for CocoaPods stats, maybe in Google. Um, there was a reference like ordering system that I built for CocoaPods. Ah, there. Go that back one. Go back one and go to quality indexes. That one. So this page here is an inverted uh, Ruby file. So it normally is Ruby, and then all the stuff around it, all the text is actually Markdown.
Huh.
So this is CocoaPods had a really clever sorting system for its search API, like something that was not possible to do at the scale of npm, but is possible to do at like 10,000 projects, like CocoaPods had. And so it would go in and it would read metadata, like how many likes does it have on GitHub, how many crashes happen on certain things, and makes all these metrics come together. But the way in which the way in which the ordering system is built is a single Ruby file that generates all this markdown too at the same time.
Hmm.
So if you ever make any changes, this page automatically updates because it is just the Ruby file that there you go. This document is a form of literative programming. I think that you could actually click on the link to CocoaDocs API next to it. Literate programming came from, it's an old school idea, but the one that I'd heard of was CoffeeScript.
Ah,
And the CoffeeScript allowed you to do a form of literate programming where, you could mix Markdown and CoffeeScript right next to each other.
that's so
Um,
funny.
yeah,
Is there a way, by the way, for me to find?
yeah, I think it should be where it says the CocoaDocs API next to the literate programming. Yeah, that could be the actual file. Yeah, you see all the
There,
comments?
yeah. Look at this. I'm just putting it in the chat. That's so cool. Yeah, I love this. Before we run out of time, I did want to ask you one final question set or starting prompt on PR review, since that was the original inciting point. Just generally, let's say you're thinking on pull request reviews in general. What is your approach? Someone sends one in. What do you do?
Okay, so generally, I'm reasonably loose with my pull requests. So I will read the code, have a pretty light think through of it, decide whether I already know and trust the author. And if it's green and I already know and trust the author, then I'm probably no. No one sets in a reviewer for me. All of my projects, I just do it myself. Go look on Danger. Go see a new Danger JS one. Like I
Okay,
review all the pull requests to that, for example.
okay,
Um, so yeah, anything closed basically, anything that's still alive at this point means that it's taken us a while to do this sort of stuff. So this is a good one, right? There are tons of features in this that I don't really know too much about because Danger supports GitLab, it supports Bitbucket, it supports all these different like systems that I don't use. And so a lot of the time, my general work process is that if it runs green, I'll start from the top, work my way down. If nothing seems too controversial, I'll just outright merge it and I'll ship a build as soon as possible. And the idea being that if I can be fast, then it doesn't matter if a thing can go through that's wrong because I can just ship a new build very quickly. Um, And
It's
so
a
as long
nice
as
way to live.
I'm in a place where I can constantly ship new builds, which generally I am, then I can get new releases out very quickly.
I like
Um,
that. It must be really nice to work in an environment like that, as opposed to an environment like CocoaPods or TypeScript, where things are a little more
yeah,
held up.
yeah, exactly. A year of build means we have to make a like it's all of this is always related to like how long does it take to make a release and how important does the release have to be. Like every TypeScript release is a very serious thing, but an insider release is like a nightly is okay. Like you might have weeks before the final builds have to go out on
Yeah,
TypeScript.
yeah,
That's when you merge an Anders PR that came out of the weekend
yeah,
and suddenly
yeah. This is cool. So
um,
yeah, I'm also noticing something that I really like, and I think you're one of the people who's influenced me in this way. Your comments are super friendly. Like, do you
oh
put
yeah.
intentional effort to make it not just neutral tone, but like friendly, happy, supportive tone?
Yeah, that one is definitely true. And I do full stop like that. These are people that have gone out of their way to improve a thing that I own, and like in many ways I get the credit for their work too.
Yeah, yeah.
And so right, like, and so it's I think it's great that people are doing this. Sometimes it's annoying. Like there are people that do send too many PRs that are trivial or uninteresting to the project, in terms of like its vision and its goals. But like almost everyone is like someone who has put the time in, and I owe them something, but I don't necessarily owe them everything. But I owe them at least being nice and polite as much as I can.
Yeah. I think as a human to human courtesy, being polite and courteous is up there. If someone, it just in terms of game theory, someone's cheating, if someone's not doing the norms that they should be doing, like if they're being rude or something, and we know it's them being rude and not just a language barrier, then, the
Yeah,
burden
exactly.
of politeness drops. But until then, humans.
A good talk on this, maybe one of the best talks on this, is called the social coding contract.
Mm. RubyConf?
There we go. This is this is how old school I am. Like to me, this is still such a new and great. Like this is the definitive one. On like where is the tension in doing open source as a long-term maintainer? Justin Searles is like he runs like test runners in Ruby. Like he maintains those sorts of things. Like really boring infrastructure that has to work on every version, has to do everything. And he sort of talks through like what is the social contract between people that are using open source and people that are creating open source. How do you do open source in a way that doesn't burn you out? Like loads of people do it, but at like my level, but most of them only do that for like a few years and then stop because it's very intense.
Yeah.
But things like this are like trying to find ways to sort of defensively deal with the amount of incoming stuff and the amount of expectations other people put on you.
Yeah. I have my own things that I do, but I'll shout out from the chat. Chrissy is shouting out something I started doing off and on quite a few years ago and only recently picked up again, which was putting little prefixes of comment type before the comment in a PR. I'm seeing if I have an example on my template repo. Oh yeah, no, I can just go to the one we were working on. So I used to give very, what is the word, effusive? Yeah, very effusive PR reviews, both for praise and
Yeah.
criticisms, and it would get to the point where it was just a wall of text, which is a fault. Like that's something I learned the hard way. Like people don't want a wall of text in their PR reviews,
Yeah.
and also another piece of feedback I had been given correctly was that hey, don't just criticize, praise. So then I have these things that are increasing the amount of text I'm giving, and yeah. So now what I do is I'll put like a question um,
Yeah.
in front of something, and especially if you don't have a lot of personal context with the person, that can be useful.
Yeah.
So now I'm just trying to do it always, and I'll eventually write a GitHub extension to force me to do
Yeah.
it.
There's and one of our golden tricks on TypeScript on CocoaPods that we used from day one is that the issue template contains please tick this if you have read the contributing guide, which is like which you would think people would read. But the thing about it is that if you read the bottom of the contributing guide, it says, please put a rainbow at the end of the please tick the contributing guide to prove that you've read it. And
Ah,
what that says to us is that somebody has actually put the time and commitment in to really figure out how to contribute to us properly. And that generally means that we put more effort into that person.
I love that. That's such a good idea. That's like
Yeah.
the like if you let us know, we'll give you $20 at the like terms and conditions paperwork.
Yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. We describe it as no red M&Ms or something like that.
no,
No brown M&Ms, right?
yeah,
If
which
you
is
include
by the
that,
way smart.
yep, yeah. So that's how we really like. If I see one of those in an issue, I will not just. I will read it properly.
Mm-hmm.
Not
I
that I
like
don't
this.
read every issue properly, but I'll give them more time than I would any other way.
I want to put this in the TypeScript ESLint Discord. I'm going to put in our thoughts. Cool. Let's talk about. By the way, how much more time do you have to give me here? How long do you want to go?
Yeah, I could give you another 20 minutes.
Okay.
We could.
Yeah. Super. Let's talk about issue templates then. I see that you have. Oops, wrong link. You have a .github in CocoaPods with issue template. You have a single issue template. We in TypeScript ESLint have started using multiple issue templates. We have
Yeah.
arguably too many of them, but also we're like a mono repo with a lot of packages. So if you file a new issue on us, you get this wall of text. And this is I would love any advice on how to trim this down. This is legitimately the smallest number of issue templates we could figure out.
Yeah, that if it works for you, and I don't mean that in a general sense of like, well, good luck. I mean like, um, I think in general there is no easy answer for this. If you feel like these are the correct funnels for your project, then they probably are.
Yeah. It's been helpful because I think a lot of projects are either in the state where they want to get more contributors of a certain type or less, and we are normally in the state of we want fewer contributors. We want fewer better contributors because we get a lot of spam from people who like don't know what TypeScript is versus TypeScript ESLint. And then of course we have the 4 checkboxes and the you must program link and repro code. But this is an intentional barrier to entry, which puts more onus on contributors, which reduces the amount of input we get, which is a double-edged sword.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. but but like there's value in both of these things, right? Like, do you have a freeform button?
Don't believe we do. No.
Well, I mean, I was gonna say, what about for security? But then you've got one for that as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, we got everything here.
Oh, I know. Where's my praise? Where's my give praise one? Right?
Oh like God. We don't want that. Don't praise us. That's not what we're here for. Shut up about it. I do wish that you could customize this page a bit more. Like 90% of users want the first 2, maybe the third. Like 70% first 2, 90% first 3, and then the rest of it, very few people. This annoys me actually. I wish more people posted documentation requests.
Documentation request is a lot of people. Yeah, that's a good one. I don't know. It feels like something you should do yourself, right? Like as a concept, because you have enough skills. If you had enough time to go in and make the issue, then it would feel like you would have the capabilities to edit the markdown, for example. But I understand that you can have more than just like if you're trying to do the documentation for I would like to create a new TSES lint rule. Do I use here's I've been writing my own quite recently actually, and I think I'm gonna get rid of the util object that you get. Like I think I can make an ESLint rule instead of using the entire TypeScript ESLint infrastructure is my current thoughts, because I'm not even using a TS prefix on my AST nodes.
Oh wow.
But like I would be able to, I'd love, I could totally see writing a request that's like, huh, I never make a URL with my thing. How do I get it without? And then I know that the answer is that you can put dot without docs somewhere, but it took me a while. There it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had to find that recently. I can understand why people would make things asking that sort of question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good stuff. I use it for automating adding code to files all the time.
Yay. Yay. I like that. I think ESN rules are an underutilized code mod option in the world, and I wish more people used them for that.
Yeah.
At Codecademy, when we were migrating our design system through successive layers of raw CSS modules to, actually, I think it was Sass. Yeah, Sass to
Yeah.
styled with the template literals to, um, and so on and so forth, up through the design, like the token-based props API design system. We were using ESN rules, and oftentimes we would autofix from one form to the next one, little layers, which is really nice.
Yeah. I used it all. So the guy that made Jest also made code mods.
Mm.
And so he would often talk about them. And so I also got very used to. We did it at Artsy.
Talk about this.
The
Code
Yeah, he
shift.
wrote JS Code Shift, which is generally considered like the first one in the like, you know, a good tool for doing it at full code base level instead of going in and pressing save on every single file.
Yeah.
Um, because in theory, the way Facebook has a single code base, right? So if you make a breaking API change, you have to change it everywhere consistently in one go. And so they created this for basically applying entire code mods across gazillions of files anytime they wanted to say make a jest API change.
Mm-hmm. Which is quite nice. And I love that philosophy of they made it for themselves and then also open sourced it for the rest of the world.
Exactly.
Perfect. Cool.
Yeah.
Well,
Optimal flow.
I have no more topics that I wanted to bring up with you. Was there anything you wanted to bring up, shout out, etc. with me?
Uh, what's a TypeScript ESLint lint that you've added recently?
Like a new rule?
Yeah.
Ooh, I like that question. Thank you. Let's look at the rules. Uh, hmm. So right now, my context has been we're about to release, trying to get to about to release the V6 beta. So we reworked the configurations. We previously had recommended. You could also add in type checked and then strict. Now we have recommended, strict, and stylistic, all with a type checked option.
Yeah.
Separating
I
out
remember.
stylistic rules, good. But to actually answer the question, one that's no mixed enums is one that it's relatively new. A lot of people will accidentally write code like this and then get confused that some like
Oh,
enum properties are strings versus numbers. So we have a rule
no,
against
I'm
that.
surprised. Yeah. Uh,
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. It's like it's like the same domain problem as making sure all switch statements are exhaustive.
Oh yeah.
Um, it's like I came from a Objective C and Swift background where you basically had to do that. Like it wasn't an option to basically not do that.
Yeah. Which is,
So
of course, a rule that we have that we do not turn on by default because that is a very controversial opinion in the JavaScript world. And I can see why you wouldn't want that. Like, I truly wish, similar to how enums, I wish there was like a general enum and then a more specific enum. I wish that JavaScript had a concept of like an exhaustive switch and a non-exhaustive switch because sometimes I want one and not the other.
yeah, yeah. Well, who knows what we'll get when in the world of what they call those new types of switch statements that everybody's trying to push.
Oh,
Matching.
TC39 matchers.
Yeah.
Pattern matching.
Pattern matching, that's the term. Yeah. There's a reasonable chance that this gets through.
It's got some good
Although
people.
not via cat. Um, but because she's not on the TypeScript team anymore.
Oh, I forgot that she
The
was on the team. Okay.
I'm not sure what
Skip
she's
down
doing
to
now.
the
Oh, she went to work on NuGet.
oh, the C# NPM.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the C# version of npm.
Look at that.
Yeah, and it
Dimensions.
weird. It's strange looking code, but I can understand what's going on. It's clever.
Yeah. Got a topic suggestion from Chrissy in the chat. Topic dealing with PRs that don't reference an issue. For me, if it's extremely trivial and something that I would press the green merge on immediately, or is like a small documentation request that is obvious to approve, then I'm okay with it. Otherwise, I'll generally ask people to file an issue because it's easier to track and
Yeah, and it's usually
anything
just a copy and
non-trivial.
paste of the PR body.
Yeah. Or if they don't want to, I can always file the issue for them. But I'd rather they go through the effort because I don't want to set up a precedent of people going through and sending PRs willy nilly because then they inevitably end up doing bigger ones that aren't what I would have wanted, and then it's
Yeah.
annoying for them.
Oh, for that, just add a vision file that defines the limits of your projects. That's what I've done for most of my major projects.
I
Um,
feel like I saw this recently, and
yeah, I don't own CocoaPods, so I don't have a vision file for that. But Danger, for example, does.
that's so
Um,
interesting.
and the idea is it sort of really encapsulates, like it, even encapsulates that it's done, right? That it's a thing that like is not planning to evolve in any strong ways. So you can rely on it to not break.
That's nice.
Um,
I like that. You can rely on it to not break. That is a legitimately good project goal. That is separate from a lot of projects that are newer stages goals.
yeah, exactly. Like I'm also pretty. mm, I'm very happy to do major Semvers when I think there's anything that even is remotely breaking. So almost all major Semvers from me probably won't require work from most people, but it will force you to look at the changelog and decide whether it's not a breaking change for you. It's like Danger's on, I don't know, yeah, 12. Look.
12.
So, that it's not that like the versions are. Wait, what?
11? You've had 12
Say,
versions starting with version 0?
maybe. I don't know. I feel like the changelog should be up to date. Maybe I just thought maybe. Oh no, it's 11. It's version 11. It's all version 11. I don't know where they got the 12 from. It's a small screen. Yeah, I don't bother with all of that stuff. Every now and again, somebody else comes in and fills it all out for me.
Oh. GitHub,
Great.
I saw this recently. I really like, they have a really nice little new button there where you can generate release notes.
Yeah.
Uh, let's see. If we wipe it out, ASDF, generate, and then it includes what's changed. And it doesn't show in this one, but if,
It shows contributors.
yeah, first timers, which I really like.
Yeah.
Too many goddamn versions here. Let's see if I get it from this one. Nope. Oh well. Anyway, yeah.
But yeah, it is good work. Yeah. I mean, GitHub is a platform that so far has not managed to sort of ruin itself in the ways that many other platforms have over the long run. I think the Microsoft acquisition did a really great job and continues to still be focusing on things people want rather than things that GitHub want people to want,
Yeah.
um, which is great.
Yeah. The fact that they are actively working on things like actions and sponsors makes me happy.
Yeah, exactly. That's good. That's good community stuff, and I'm happy to still be using GitHub for all of my everything all the time.
Yeah.
Plus, what if they stop following me on Twitter?
Oh, GitHub follows you on Twitter.
Yeah.
That's a nice little feather in your cap.
Yeah.
But cool. Speaking of Twitter,
Shame I didn't tweet.
yeah, you. I believe your current Twitter name is Orta. Leave this site.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
I
Well,
know.
this is
It
a
passed
good.
my threshold.
Yeah. This is a good little segue time. So we can find you on. Oh, your link is.
Yeah, I haven't even gone back and edited my new one. I'm hanging out with all the cool Veet kids.
Yeah.
I'm really down with the kids on Web Tools, which is ran by like the sort of Veet Vue sets of folks.
That's cool.
Yeah, I
All right.
like them.
Where else can we find you? on the internet?
GitHub. I mean, realistically, until I escape all of my work being closed source, then that's really the only thing that I can do. All of my work is closed source at the moment. One day
What's this?
it might be open source, but
This is
but
cute.
until then, yeah, it's pretty cute, right? It pulls out old open PRs that I've done every day and turns them into a GIF,
Nice.
and then re-uploads it. Back when I used to do more of those.
Back in the day. Well, awesome. Well, is there any other wisdom you wanna leave us with before we find someone else to raid?
No, Bronifty, I have an auto blocker for people that pay for Twitter, so it may have hit you.
What is that auto blocker? I've seen a few of these.
I think it's called Block the Blue.
Block the blue. There it is. Where is it? Does it have an official site? A GitHub. Oh, good. It's open source. Love to see it.
Yeah. It does what it does. And I don't go in there, but it keeps my timeline really clean because you don't get all these, the replies from most people that are blue are generally not worth it. So it's nice to not have to deal with that whenever I do tweet, which would be barely, not even once a month at this point now. Maybe it's been about a year.
I'm also realizing that I have a refined save replies extension, and I really like how they have this little install. So I'm just gonna file an issue on the docs. Yeah, by the way, most of my repos, just to throw back, most of my repos just have these 4 categories: bug, docs, feature, tooling. Bam.
Are they the default, or do you have to do anything for that? A new repo. I guess they're probably still.
I actually don't know. Yeah, let's look at a new repo. What are the default? I don't think they have default templates set up for anyone, but I do have my own. There it is, template type that I use. Yeah. Anyway, pardon me as I selfishly work on my own filing of an issue. There we go. I'll just throw that in the background.
It reminds me of whenever I see like a really fancy table, and I'm like, ooh, I wanna recreate that table on my repo.
Oh yeah, love a good formatted table. But all right, well, this was fun. Thank you so much for hanging out, Orta. To recap, we talked about PRs, general philosophies around reviewing, setting up things like vision docs and brown M&Ms at the bottom of code of conducts. A lot of good other stuff. So this was fun. Thank you so much for hanging out.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure to hang out.
The last thing to do is pick someone to raid. I normally go with whoever has the fewest at the very end.
Oh.
So, finite singularity.
It's one of the V crew. Nice.
Oh yeah, Daniel's a lovely. Let's do Daniel. I like Dan. Daniel introduced me to the concept of shower oranges. Have you heard of this thing?
No, but I do shower beers, so it might be the same thing.
It's the same thing, but the problem normally with oranges is I'm going to start the raid.
Because it's so juicy.
Yep, not a problem in the shower. So y'all tell Daniel that we appreciate his culinary delights.
Hey, wait, what is this raid for plus 250 points? Do I have to go and do something for this?
I don't know. I still don't know how raids work. But this was fun. Thanks everyone in the chat.
Yeah.
Bye.
Ciao.
I'm still not sure if we're streaming or if we raided or what. But anyway, I'm going to stop streaming in my OBS. But no, seriously, this